My family tried to rob me blind. What happened next will shock you. She said it without hesitation. He is mentally unfit to manage his own affairs, Your Honor. My mother didn't tremble. She didn't pause. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, almost gentle, the way people speak when they believe they're being reasonable. The courtroom went quiet. I didn't react. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I checked my watch. 3 minutes. That's how long she had left before everything she built collapsed. My name is Evan Calder, I'm 31 years old, and I've spent most of my life being underestimated by the people who were supposed to know me best. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Quietly. Systematically. Like erosion. My mother, Marla Calder, sat straight-backed at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, eyes moist but controlled. She had invited extended relatives to the hearing, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, distant aunts who remembered me only as the quiet one. She wanted witnesses. An audience. Proof that she was the worried parent and I was the problem. Her attorney finished speaking. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that never quite touched a tear. I remained still. Judge Halvorson adjusted her glasses and looked at me. Mr. Calder, these are serious claims. Your mother alleges confusion, poor judgment, and reckless handling of the estate assets. Do you wish to respond? My mother leaned forward slightly. She wanted a reaction. She wanted anger, panic, denial, anything emotional she could point to and say, see? There it is. Instead, I stood calmly and smoothed the cuff of my jacket. Yes, Your Honor, I said evenly. I'm listening. I'd just like her to finish. A flicker crossed her face. Barely visible. But it was there. Her lawyer continued, listing my so-called failures, my small apartment, my lack of a car, my refusal to settle into something stable. He described me as isolated, withdrawn, irresponsible with money. They painted a picture of a man slowly unraveling. What they didn't know, what they never asked, was that my life looked small by design. 2 years earlier, my mother had stood in that same studio apartment, nose wrinkled with contempt. This is embarrassing, Evan, she'd said. I tell people you're finding yourself, but honestly, it just looks like you're stuck. She left that day in a luxury SUV registered under a shell company I would later trace back to an account funded with estate withdrawals. What she called finding myself was actually concealment. While she criticized my thrift store jackets, I was quietly managing portfolios for private clients who valued discretion over flash. While she mocked my bus rides, I was redirecting liquidity into assets she didn't even know existed. I wasn't broke. I was silent. Back in the courtroom, my mother clasped her hands tighter. Evan doesn't understand money, she said softly. He lets it disappear. Large sums. No reports. No concern. I fear for his safety. A murmur rippled through the gallery. I thought about the first transfer she made without permission. Then the second. Then the 10th. I let it happen. Because sometimes justice requires patience. Mr. Calder, the judge said, records show significant withdrawals from the trust. Nearly $700,000. Can you explain where that money went? I stood again. I can, I said. But not yet. I picked up a blue folder from the table, thin, unassuming. I didn't stop the transfers, I continued calmly, because stopping them early would have protected the person stealing from me. My mother stiffened. I wanted the full picture. Her lawyer objected. The judge raised a hand. I stepped forward, placing the folder gently on the bench. This, I said, is not a defense. It's a timeline. The judge opened it. And everything changed. The judge's eyes flicked over the first page. Lines of numbers, dates, and IP addresses sprawled across the sheet like a map. My mother's mouth fell open slightly, the rehearsed calm beginning to crack. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to reveal. Each transfer, I explained evenly, originated from a single computer located at 1127 Elmwood Lane. That's your office, Mom. Specifically, your study. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Some of the relatives murmured, some clutched their pearls. She glanced at me, confusion mingling with fear. What is this? She demanded, voice wavering. It's evidence of the withdrawals you've been making, I said, letting my words hang. And yes, the money did leave the estate's account. But it didn't vanish. I turned a page. Charts lit up the room like the glow of a city at night. Every cent went through intermediaries you controlled, into accounts I documented. Apex Consulting. A company registered in Nevis. The accounts were created using your name. All transfers, all destinations, all devices, tracked. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of pens and the soft shuffle of papers. I let the quiet grow, thick and suffocating. My mother's attorney, Gideon Marsh, whispered to her, urging calm. She shook her head, stunned. Her performance was unraveling in real time. I didn't pause. I wanted them to feel the weight. Your Honor, if I had intervened at $50,000, it would have only been a slap on the wrist. The full scope, the full picture, only emerges when the total stolen amount exceeds $500,000 and crosses state lines. That creates a pattern of interstate wire fraud. Federally prosecutable. The judge's brow arched, intrigued. Even Gideon's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. I leaned slightly forward, hands flat on the table, voice unwavering. I left the security alerts off on purpose. The door unlocked. Every transaction documented. Every IP, every login, all to expose the truth. Her smirk, once so confident, faltered. Her entire plan depended on me panicking, crying, begging. And I didn't. Walter, my stepfather, wasn't finished. He rose abruptly, pounding his hand on the table. She admits it. She watched the money leave the estate. I tilted my head. I watched, yes. But I didn't let it disappear. I documented it. And you miscalculated, Walter. You assumed my silence was fear. It wasn't. It was calculation. The gallery whispered. The judge leaned forward. I opened a second folder, thicker, heavier, more deliberate. This folder contains legal documents. Your guardianship motion, Walter, assumes incompetence. But here are deeds, purchases, contracts, and filings. I've been quietly securing control of the very assets you thought you were about to claim. Walter's eyes widened. His lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge raised a hand. I own your office building, I continued. I bought the note on your house. I own your debts. You came here to gain guardianship, you're leaving as my tenant. The room froze. My mother gasped. Walter opened his mouth, nothing came out. I smiled faintly. Calm. Patient. Because for the first time in years, the predators in the room realized they were cornered. I waited. Let them feel the sting. Let them understand that I had built my life quietly, deliberately, invisibly, and that invisibility was now my weapon. The courtroom air was electric. Every relative who had once judged me now understood they had been fooled. Every look of superiority, every whispered insult, every sneer came back to them, magnified. And I was just beginning. The courtroom's tension was almost tangible, thick enough to touch. Walter's confident posture had crumbled, he slouched in his chair like a man realizing he had misread the board. My mother's face was pale, her eyes darting between the folders and me, as if trying to unsee the proof of her own misdeeds. I didn't let up. I had rehearsed this moment not once, but dozens of times. Every figure, every IP log, every transfer was accounted for. I had turned their assumption of my incompetence into the very mechanism of their undoing. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of certainty, these logs show a pattern. Every withdrawal, every unauthorized transfer, originates from devices under Walter's control. He attempted to make these transfers appear as if I had authorized them, as if I were incapable of managing my affairs. The judge leaned closer, her pen poised over her notepad. Even Gideon Marsh, my mother's lawyer, was leaning forward now, sensing the gravity of the evidence. I flipped to the next page, a series of wire confirmations. Each one detailed amounts, dates, and the recipient account. These aren't shell companies randomly created. They are Apex Consulting accounts. Walter incorporated them using a known alias, specifically to funnel estate funds without detection. The pattern shows premeditation. This is deliberate fraud, Your Honor. Gasps filled the room. My cousins clutched each other, whispering anxiously. The aunts muttered, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Even my mother's usual poise faltered, she was silent, trying to recover her composure. Walter slammed his hand onto the table again, louder this time. This is fabricated. She's lying. She authorized every transfer. I met his gaze evenly, eyes unblinking. No, Walter. I didn't fabricate anything. I authorized nothing. And here's why you miscalculated, I documented everything as it happened. Every step you took, every attempt to disguise the funds, was recorded and timestamped. You didn't just fail to deceive me, you exposed yourself to federal prosecution. He opened his mouth again, but words failed him. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come. I leaned slightly forward, resting my hands on the table. If I had intervened earlier, stopped the first few transfers, this would have been a civil dispute, a minor inconvenience. But your repeated actions created a pattern of interstate wire fraud. That's a federal offense with mandatory minimums. No parole. No probation. 10 years minimum. You've ensnared yourself, Walter. And this court is about to witness it. He blinked rapidly, the arrogance draining from his face. His lawyer, Stephen, was sweating profusely, glancing at the judge as if pleading silently for intervention. I let the silence linger a beat longer, then opened the final folder, thick, heavy, and embossed with my own seal. This contains the contracts, purchase agreements, and deeds securing control over your assets. Office building? Bought. Home note? Acquired. Debts? Paid. Everything you thought you were taking as guardianship now falls under my ownership. You came here seeking control, you're leaving as my tenant. Walter's jaw slackened. His confidence evaporated entirely. The courtroom had shifted. Every relative, every guest, could see the reversal. The predator had become prey. Sign the acknowledgement, I said, placing a withdrawal and legal notice across the table. 30 days to vacate. Refuse, and the locks change by noon. His hands shook as he reached for the paper. My mother sputtered, caught somewhere between disbelief and fury. Walter muttered under his breath, signing mechanically, defeated. The courtroom erupted as the doors burst open. Federal marshals entered with precision, arresting Walter for perjury and activating a sealed federal indictment I had tipped off months earlier. My mother tried to protest, but the evidence was unassailable. I remained calm, almost detached. This was the culmination of years of observation, patience, and meticulous planning. The predators had cornered themselves. I hadn't needed anger or confrontation, I had let the system work while they acted impulsively. Outside, the air felt cleaner. The sky stretched wide, indifferent but reassuring. I finalized the sale of Walter's property, confirmed the eviction notices, and deleted his contact information from every directory I controlled. Peace wasn't given. It was taken. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. They hadn't just lost control, they had lost the narrative. Their carefully curated facade, built on lies and manipulation, had crumbled. Because I wasn't their child, or their victim. I was the executor of consequences, and I had one. The courtroom emptied gradually, leaving only a handful of lingering relatives, stunned and speechless. I stayed seated a moment longer, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. Walter had been removed, my mother's composure shattered, and the rest of the family forced into an uncomfortable silence that I savored like a private victory. As I packed my folders, I reflected on the years of planning that had led to this moment. My life had never been about their approval or recognition. Every quiet night in my apartment, every early morning call with investors overseas, every seemingly insignificant decision had been a step toward this reckoning. While they were preoccupied with appearances, I was building a real empire, one that couldn't be mocked or dismissed. Outside the courthouse, the cold January air hit my face. I let it fill my lungs. The city moved on, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted within one courtroom. I called my assistant, confirming the final details of a major Series B funding round. Sienna's team had already reached out, her eyes wide with the recognition of someone who finally understood the depth of my work. I walked slowly to my car, mentally reviewing everything Walter had attempted. The money he had stolen, or at least thought he had, was now redistributed into secure, offshore accounts, invested and leveraged in ways that would continue to grow my company, Ether Systems, exponentially. Every dollar he had considered his was now a testament to my foresight. Back at my office, I laid out the blueprints for the next phase of my company. While Walter had believed me to be a distracted, flighty woman incapable of adult responsibility, I had been thinking decades ahead. Each logistical contract, each AI integration, each international partnership had been calibrated to maximize growth and resilience. It wasn't just business, it was justice manifesting in numbers, in strategy, in undeniable proof of capability. I thought about my family again. Not with anger, but with clarity. They had lived their lives building a kingdom of perception, measuring worth by rings, investments, and influence. I had lived mine building a kingdom of substance, proof, and results. Their empire might appear shiny and impressive, but it was fragile, entirely dependent on appearances. Mine was unshakable, because it existed in reality, in execution, in proof. And then there was Sienna. She had been the only person at that dinner who had truly seen me, who had recognized the scope of what I was building. She wasn't impressed by my family's false bravado, she had recognized skill, intellect, and vision. That recognition mattered more than any applause or accolades from those who had doubted me. I allowed myself a small, private smile. In the quiet aftermath of the courtroom battle, I realized that revenge wasn't about theatrics or loud confrontation. It was about patience, preparation, and precision. It was about creating circumstances where the truth could speak louder than any lies or manipulation. And tonight, the truth had spoken. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of freedom settle across my shoulders. It wasn't just the financial freedom or the vindication. It was the freedom from their expectations, their judgments, their manipulations. Every insult, every dismissal, every underestimation had been fuel for this quiet reckoning. I sat back at my desk, reviewing the documents one last time, and allowed myself to imagine the next phase: international expansion, AI-driven global logistics, and the ripple effects of a company so strategically structured that no obstacle, legal, financial, or personal, could derail it. Then, almost reflexively, I picked up my phone and sent a single message to Sienna: meeting Monday. Series B. Let's change the game. The message sent, I leaned back, letting the tension of the past weeks and years ease. Justice had been served, but more than that, control had been reclaimed. I had turned their arrogance and deceit against them, and in the process, I had secured not just my company, but my life, my autonomy, and my narrative. Sometimes, I thought, the loudest victories are the quietest. You don't announce them with fanfare. You execute them with precision, and let the consequences speak for themselves. And as I looked at the skyline of the city from my office window, I felt a profound satisfaction. Not triumph born of rage, but of justice earned, meticulously, patiently, undeniably. Tonight, I had proven to them, and more importantly, to myself, that no amount of doubt or manipulation could ever suppress what was built with skill, intelligence, and foresight. The quiet victories, after all, were the ones that left the loudest echoes. The next morning, the city was indifferent, bustling and unaware of the personal revolution that had just concluded. I arrived at Ether Systems headquarters, a modest but sleek space tucked into a corner of the tech district. The outside world saw only glass and steel. Inside, it was alive, servers humming, screens glowing, ideas in motion. The quiet buzz was my symphony. Sienna was already there, reviewing the latest projections with my COO. She looked up as I entered, her eyes sparking with genuine recognition. "You weren't playing around," she said, almost in disbelief. This is incredible." I smiled, the calm I carried through years of quiet planning radiating outward. "The dinner was just the prologue," I said. "Let's make sure the world reads the main act properly." While the courtroom had delivered justice against Walter, there were still pieces of the family empire to address. The office building he had used as his personal kingdom, the shell companies holding my inheritance, all of it had been carefully documented. I had ensured that my leverage was complete. Any attempt to contest, any effort to undermine me, would be futile. At 10 a.m., my legal team called. The conservatorship Walter had sought was officially dismissed, and an audit of his finances was underway. His perjury, once meticulously hidden, had now become his downfall. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible sigh of satisfaction. The law had done its work, but it had only accelerated what I had already engineered. The office phone rang. It was a call I had anticipated for months, a major international investor seeking a meeting. They had tracked Ether Systems' progress silently, unaware of the obstacles I had quietly neutralized along the way. Now, the gates were open. Every delay, every moment of doubt cast by my family's dismissals had been nothing more than additional fuel. By midday, Sienna and I were deep in strategy. Every contract, every investor pitch, every AI rollout had to be aligned perfectly. There was no room for error. I watched her take notes, her admiration quiet but evident. For the first time, I wasn't explaining myself to skeptics or detractors. I was strategizing with an ally. Meanwhile, my former family, the ones who had attempted to define my worth by appearances and shallow accomplishments, were beginning to feel the tremors. A whispered phone call here, a confused glance there, the subtle realization that their little failure was quietly dismantling the world they had constructed around themselves. I allowed myself a thought: sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes, it creeps into every unnoticed corner until the walls collapse. I had spent years quietly building strength, honing every skill, anticipating every move. They had only ever seen the surface. Now, they would witness the consequences. The evening brought a different kind of satisfaction. I returned to my apartment, a space that my family had once considered evidence of my inadequacy. I brewed a cup of coffee, looked out at the city lights, and reflected. The courtroom victory had been sweet, yes, but it was only a single note in the larger symphony of reclaiming my life. In that quiet, I allowed myself to plan the final maneuvers. Properties, investments, corporate leverage, all positioned to neutralize any lingering influence Walter or anyone else might attempt to exert. Every insult, every slight, every public dismissal had been carefully logged, transformed into knowledge, into power. And then, almost ceremoniously, I reviewed my messages from Sienna. She had reached out again, confirming the schedule for Monday's meeting with the Series B investors. The anticipation was electric. This was more than business, it was validation, recognition, and the culmination of years of relentless preparation. Finally, I allowed a moment of private satisfaction. The silence of my apartment, once a sign of invisibility, now echoed with purpose. Each hum of the server, each glowing screen, each quiet tick of the clock was a reminder, the woman they had underestimated was no longer defined by their judgments. She was defined by results, by precision, by undeniable success. Sometimes, I thought, revenge isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't need applause. It is quiet, calculated, inevitable. And when it comes, when it lands, it cannot be ignored. I poured another cup of coffee, gazing at the skyline. My empire was growing, my enemies had crumbled, and the world, whether they knew it or not, was about to take notice. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to smile without restraint. I had taken the silence they used to dismiss me and transformed it into power. Every step, every calculation, every quiet night of work had led to this. The quiet empire, rising not from noise or recognition, but from undeniable, unstoppable competence. The morning of the final board meeting arrived with an unusual calm. Ether Systems' conference room was alive with energy, yet I felt the serenity of someone who had already won. Every seat was filled by investors, analysts, and strategic partners. Sienna sat beside me, her presence steady, almost like a silent guardian of the order we had built. The doors opened, and Julian appeared, followed by a few family acquaintances who had been tipped off about my recent victories. They thought they could enter, perhaps to charm, perhaps to intimidate. Instead, they walked into a storm they could not see. I stood, placing my hands on the polished oak table. "Good morning," I began, my voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "I trust everyone is ready to review the final Series B proposal." Whispers ran through the room. My former family's faces reflected shock, disbelief, and slowly, a creeping recognition of reality. They had spent decades defining my life through petty judgments and invisible measures of worth. Now, every assumption they had made was being dismantled in front of them. As the meeting progressed, I led the presentation with precision. Charts, projections, AI analytics, every detail meticulously aligned. Investors leaned in, impressed by not just the technical innovation, but by the clarity and confidence behind every decision. My team, quiet but formidable, executed flawlessly. Sienna occasionally interjected with insights, signaling a partnership rooted in mutual respect rather than obligation. Halfway through, Julian could no longer contain himself. "Khloe, this is impressive." I held up a hand. "Julian," I said softly but firmly, "please let the data speak for itself." His smugness faltered as graphs, numbers, and real-time simulations demonstrated not just profitability, but a market revolution in progress. Each slide was a reminder that every mockery, every dismissive comment, every attempt to limit me had been nothing more than an obstacle I had converted into fuel. By the end of the presentation, the room was silent, a silence entirely different from the one my family had once imposed on me. This silence was recognition. It was awe. It was respect earned through action, not inheritance. Investors nodded, signed documents, and committed funds. Sienna leaned in, whispering, "They see it now. They see you." I nodded, letting the moment settle. Outside, the city continued its indifferent bustle, unaware of the private empire rising within it. Later that evening, I returned to the apartment, my sanctuary, my command center, the place where quiet had been my armor. Messages flooded in from partners, clients, and journalists eager to cover Ether Systems' meteoric ascent. I smiled, finally acknowledging the truth I had carried for so long. I had transformed invisibility into influence, doubt into opportunity, and dismissal into dominance. As I sat back, reflecting on Walter's downfall, Julian's stunned face, and the complete collapse of their illusions, I realized something profound. Revenge had never been my goal. Justice, in its purest, most elegant form, had been. I poured a glass of wine, lifting it in a silent toast to the years of preparation, to the nights spent coding while they laughed, to the quiet determination that had carried me here. This was not vengeance, it was the power of foresight, patience, and self-belief. And finally, I allowed myself one last thought, a quiet triumph echoing in my mind: the woman they underestimated, dismissed, and attempted to control had become untouchable. Every insult, every attempt to diminish me, had been absorbed, converted, and weaponized. The silent girl they once mocked now ruled not through noise, but through undeniable results. The empire was mine, quiet, unassuming, unstoppable. As the city lights flickered against the night sky, I knew this was only the beginning. Silence, once my prison, had become my throne. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day.